Friends, allies, and Americans, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast, where we tell the stories of folks who defend your children's rights by advocating for inclusive public school systems and who fight for diversity across our nation. I'm your host, Karen Swoboda. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast. My guest today is Gregg Ross. Gregg is a parent from Brevard County, Florida. So if you recognize that location, it is where Moms for Liberty started. And Gregg is going to be sharing some of his experiences as being one of the frontrunners to the very visible attack on the American public school system. Gregg, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast.
Good morning, Karen. Thank you for having me.
Gregg, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm probably like a lot of your listeners. I'm just a concerned parent here who has kids in the local school system. I've lived in Brevard County for 24 years. Mm-hmm. Seen a lot of changes here over that time. And I became involved in kind of school board activism starting around early 2021, which was, when Moms for Liberty really started to kind of raise its head here locally.
I was going to say, as soon as you said early 2021, I know what that date means. So how did it come onto your radar? What was the first thing you remember seeing that just seemed not right?
Yeah. So to step back a little further, I'd actually worked for the Brevard School District back in 2018. So I always kind of paying attention to the school board meetings a little bit. And then, there was a fundamental shift in what was happening at the school board meetings in 2021 when Moms for Liberty started showing up. And the first things they did were speak out about certain books, right? And then as we got into the summer of 2021, we were in the middle of COVID, and then they started speaking out against masks.
Right.
And to give a little history of myself, I'm a biology major, spent a couple of decades doing scientific research on diseases. So I'm not really a healthcare professional, but I certainly believed in the power of
science?
Masks. Right, science, right, to provide safety for people. And so that really kind of got me fired up to get a little bit more involved in what was going on at the school district when my kids were going to school, and they were trying to not have teachers be masks and not have students be masked. And that's really where I really got heavily involved. And then I started making connections, and I've been involved ever since.
I think that with the whole masking thing, I think that was the first time that I really understood the level of cruelty within that organization, because I have a child with severe chronic respiratory problems. Mm-hmm. And in my community, that was their thing, like the masking. And I thought to myself, oh, they're just not putting I was so naive at the point, like they're just not putting two and two together. They don't realize that there are students who could potentially die. I mean, that's what my daughter's doctor told me, if they got this illness. And so I went on to a public social media group, and I said, oh, listen, the masks are really important because my daughter needs to go to school. Like she's been with all the other kids, but now she wants to go back. And they were turned right around and said, you know what, you should keep your daughter home. And I was like, wow, and so there was a complete, we see this now regularly, a complete lack of empathy and understanding and appreciation of anybody who's different, whether it's a disability or the color of their skin, or, they have health challenges that require certain things. So anyway, the masking, people, I think, sometimes forget that was their initial hook. So from there, they came onto your radar, had to be an eyebrow raising moment. At what point did you decide that you needed to counter that and speak out against it?
Right. So what kind of grew from there was a Facebook community that came together called Families for Safe Schools. And I kind of got heavily involved with them, and they would go to meetings and speak out, in opposition to Moms for Liberty, really, and talk
Mhm.
about masking and providing safe schools, and there were other topics that were coming up at the same time, arming teachers, that kind
Yes.
of thing. So, um,
I want to
so
get
it,
into that too, by the way. Yeah.
right, okay,
Yeah.
and so that was the first group I really got involved uh, with them, and kind of was heavily involved with the leadership, kind of providing some direction on what I thought they should do on certain topics,
Mhm.
scientific topics. So, um, and from there, it just I really early on I kind of worked behind the scenes. I don't want to say giving advice, but more consultation with the leadership of that group, which was just again
The
more
Families for
local
Safe Schools group.
families for
So
safe
that
schools.
group,
Yeah,
just to clarify, the Families for Safe Schools group was coordinated by parents who were um, not aligned with Moms for Liberty.
correct.
Okay.
Right. Yeah,
Like
yeah. They
sometimes they use these names that you think that, I mean, you think Moms
right,
for Liberty sounds, so I just want to make sure that I
right,
understand. So Families for Safe Schools genuinely wanted their schools to be safe, right? As in
correct.
healthy, and, whatever. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and they were in direct opposition to Moms for Liberty,
Gotcha.
right? So they came out and said that, and they really were. They were a nonpartisan group.
Yeah.
There's still remnants of that group that's active today if you go look them up on Facebook, and but they really were nonpartisan. There was a lot of members of you know uh, both parties plus
Right.
independents that were on that site a lot. So um, and they really they did some really good work, and they finally decided they became a nonprofit. They uh, built out some tenants they wanted to work on. They started getting politically involved. A nonprofit that was in direct opposition to the local Moms for Liberty. So, um, and they actually, one of the leaders of that group actually ended up running for the local school board in 2022.
Did they get
Um,
in?
they did not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was kind of a big blow to the organization, but I think everybody kind of knew the wins here in Brevard. So, um,
Why
uh,
do you think, I mean, just genuinely as an outsider, why do you think that they were able to get such a foothold so quickly with such a horrible message and mission?
yeah, are you talking locally or across the nation? Right. I
Well,
think,
across the nation,
yeah,
I can kind of speak to that. So I'm
yeah,
looking at Brevard as their first,
yeah,
and they were like like they were
right. I
on Alex Jones like within a month of their
right,
kind of right. Like they
right.
so what
Yeah,
I have
I
some
think,
theories, but I'm wondering what your theories
yeah.
are
So
being the one on the ground who saw it.
right, and uh, it was just kind of a perfect storm here. So one of the things you can look at is the demographics of Brevard County. So Brevard County is um, uh, it is a large area of it. It has a concentration of highly educated people because of this. It's the Space Coast, right?
Right.
Uh,
Right.
we have Cape Canaveral here, and SpaceX, and we have some Department of Defense contractors here. But outside of those pockets, it is a heavily rural county. And if you look at the demographics, like 25% of Brevard County is people who don't have a high school education. So uh, that's not what made Moms for Liberty successful, but it
Mhm.
certainly speaks to who they could rile up to with misinformation to get um, politically active, right? Which
And
is what
I
we've kind of seen on a larger scale across the nation, right?
absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think, I think that's an important point. And I want to also say that, I'm married to a man who has no college education. And so this isn't, and he's a wonderful and caring and very protective of his kids. And, we probably considered all the buzzwords that, Moms for Liberty would want to name anybody. But there is some truth to that, because I think that people who don't have an education, who have never been exposed, I mean, critical thinking is really what we're talking about,
Hmm.
and who have never been exposed and encouraged to be critical thinkers, tend to, unless they are, like my husband, or proactive in their own like exploration and curiosity of the world around them, tend to be a lot easier to scare.
Right.
And so ultimately, it seems like fear is a driving force behind groups like Moms for Liberty, right? I mean,
Right.
would you agree pretty much? So we
Yep.
have a large group of people. There's a large amount of fear, and God knows in the middle of COVID, everybody was terrified, and there's no way not to be, and there's no way to pretend. I mean, you can pretend now. I see it all the time. It wasn't as bad
Right.
as it was. Like people want to say, I live outside of New York City. Like you could drive and see the like trailers that were used as temporary morgues, right? I
Right.
mean, this was a
Right.
terrifying time. And so now you've got this group, and what are you going to be the most afraid and passionate about is
Right.
when it's your children. Okay. So like you said, perfect storm. So you've got
Right.
this perfect storm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Continue.
And there was a few other factors that played into that, right? One is Brevard County also at that point in time, since the early 2000s, um, and I'm going to talk about political parties here for a second because I think
Yeah,
it's kind of important to the point.
sure.
Is it had been I don't want to say a heavily Republican county, but the
Mm.
Republicans were certainly in charge of a lot of things and had the money to invest in local communication platforms. They had AM radio. Um, they have a conservative pay-to-play newspaper.
Ah,
They
okay.
The churches were very relevant here in spreading a lot of this information.
Yeah.
And something I was just talking with some other members this morning about was, um, you know, what President Obama was really good at was recognizing the power of internet communication platforms.
Right.
And he
Right.
used that to great effect to get into office twice, right? And I
Mhm.
think come 2016, the Republicans learned from that.
Yeah.
And they started heavily investing in communication platforms on the internet. And so it was Moms for Liberty was able, with their initial connections, able to latch onto that and be able to spread that misinformation really quick. I mean, Steve Bannon and others, had some
Yeah, like
platforms
I
at that
said,
point,
Alex Jones.
right?
I mean,
Alex Jones, yeah,
this is another thing for our listeners to understand that a normal nonprofit does not have that kind of trajectory,
right,
right? The normal nonprofit,
absolutely,
you are not on national news within a month of founding,
right,
unless there is, and so they have the money and political backing
yep,
um, that started all this, and wow,
yeah,
did it work?
right, yeah. And so that was the perfect storm, right? They were in the right place, school
Yeah.
boards, with the right message or the right strategy. They were attacking school board policies, right?
Mhm.
And at the right time in the middle of a COVID pandemic. So that was really it was to give them credit, it was a great strategy and it worked
I
very well for them.
have
Yeah.
to absolutely. So what ended up happening is that Jennifer Jenkins unseated, was it Tiffany Justice that she, or Tina
It
Descovich? I
was
get the
Tina
two of them.
Descovich. Yeah.
Okay. So Jennifer Jenkins, who is actually, she runs her own nonprofit organization, and she's been on our podcast, and she's wonderful. And she got on this school board seat and unseated, the horror, but look at what it unleashed.
Yep.
Tina Descovich. And so, Tina meets up with Tiffany Justice, and they end up forming this Moms for Liberty quote, and just took off like wildfire because, in my opinion, the Republicans in power recognized that for what it was,
Hmm.
very savvy, and capitalized on it. So in the meantime, let's go back to Brevard. So you've got now how talk to me about the school system in Brevard County. You said you've lived there for 24 years. How have schools in Florida in general been faring over the past couple decades?
Yeah. So uh, what maybe a lot of people don't know is that Florida has been um, the legislature has been strictly Republican since 1999. So going
Mm,
on 25 years. So over that time, we've seen just what I like to refer to as a slow strangle of
Right.
schools, of the
Right.
schools here in Florida. Uh, just a slow, steady underfunding of the schools. Now, that's not to say that um, school districts in Florida didn't have problems before that. Corruption is
Oh,
local, small local corruption is a thing in the South, just like it is in the Northeast. And school districts, which being run by both parties, have been, uh, you know, there's plenty of instances of corruption down here in school districts, no matter which party is running them. And the Republicans have used that kind of uh, fear of, school districts don't know what they're doing to kind of just
right.
slowly apply, underfunding to the school districts. And what you see is one of the big issues we have here locally
Mm.
is um, kids that don't get what are called IEP minutes, which is basically your special education kids or kids that are struggling, and they're required by law, federal law, to get these kind of one-on-one minutes with either like a speech pathologist or a
Yeah.
reading coach.
Yeah.
And uh, almost every district in the state fails at providing those minutes by law.
Wow.
Um, so you've seen an exodus of teachers, especially especially since COVID, um,
Right.
an exodus of teachers in the school districts. And what we've seen here locally, and Brevard is a fairly one of the largest counties in Florida for a school district. It's 70 plus miles long. It's kind of skinny and long, but so they have to have a lot of schools kind of spread out
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
cover that. And we have 70,000 plus students, right? And the growth of charter schools here has really started to affect the public schools here as well. So,
And there is, and I've spoken about this a few times on the show, but it's really important to understand what charter schools are. So a charter school is basically a private school that's funded with tax dollars. And or is it? Like before
well,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah. So there's and Florida has a menagerie of these different kind of
gotcha.
schools, but and it can vary from district to district. So each county
Mhm.
has a school district here in Florida. There's 67 of them. And charter schools can be of two sorts. They can be um, what we call kind of these public charter schools that are not, they're nonprofits.
Right.
They don't make a profit, and uh, and kids can go there, and it's kind of under the public school umbrella to a degree. There's
Right.
also, and there's a lot less of these kind of for-profit charter schools that also fall under that public umbrella, but they are strictly they have no problem coming out and saying they're for-profit. Um, the issue we have here in Florida is that those charter schools are not held to the same standards
That,
as the public schools in a lot of
this
ways.
is
So
the important thing. So
yeah,
go ahead. What does that mean specifically?
yeah,
Speaking of IEPs and all that stuff.
right, yeah. So that means that they can have teachers that are not certified,
Right.
right? Or the certifications are less stringent as they are for public school teachers. Um, they don't necessarily have to uh, buy into the standardized testing
Hmm.
programs we have here,
Right.
which has been changed dramatically here in Florida over the last few years. And when I say nonprofit, what that really means is, there's one of the ways you can run a nonprofit is that you can, be the president or the director of a nonprofit and get paid a pretty good salary, right? So
Right.
nonprofit's really kind of a misnomer to a degree
Right. Like you can
with
still
that,
make a profit and
right?
be
And
a nonprofit.
yeah, and the other way they feed profits over is the school may be a nonprofit, but they contract with an outside company to
Oh,
manage the nonprofit school, and
right.
that outside company is a for-profit company.
Well,
So
to me the key thing is, and this is the basic, that the charter schools don't have to. Public schools have to accept everybody. They are required by law to accept everyone. Charter schools don't have to, and they don't even, or most charter schools don't even have to like give a reason. They can, you can have a child that has special needs. Say say there's a deaf child, and in a public school, they would be required to put together um, tools that child, whether it's an interpreter or something like that, so that that child could have the same quality learning experience as the other children in the school. Whereas a charter school or private school can simply say, you know what, we don't want to fund to pay for an interpreter for this
Right.
little person. And so they are left, on their own with a
Right.
public school that could very well now be completely defunded. So about halfway through our podcast, I always like to give a shout out to a volunteer. We're a little more than halfway through at this point. But Gregg, I was wondering if you know of any volunteers, defensive democracy volunteers in your community who maybe deserve a shout out here.
Oh, certainly. I want to give a shout out to Kelly Curvin, Defense Democracy member who has fought hard over the last 2 years for public education here in Brevard County. She's at every school board meeting. She speaks at every school board meeting, and she does a really good job of calling out our school board members when they're doing stupid things. So my shout outs to Kelly Curvin. And there are plenty of other people here that deserve a shout out in Brevard County. But Kelly has definitely risen to the occasion. So
I think that's great, and it goes to show, like what you just said about Kelly is sometimes resistance is fairly simple. Sometimes resistance is just showing up. So anybody who's listening to this podcast and you're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to protect my public schools, show up. Go
yep.
and speak. And, it doesn't always have to be something horrible. God knows if your school district is doing something right, make a public statement, thank them, let them know. So that is, so I appreciate that. I think Kelly certainly does deserve that. Gregg, let's talk about to me, this is one of the most disturbing things is arming teachers, which Florida has certainly been toying with. Are there any school districts in Florida that are currently doing that, or are they still trying to, make it palatable so that people will swallow that pill?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't say that there are not any districts in Florida that are doing that. I'm
Mhm.
much more familiar with what Brevard County is doing, right? Which is arming everybody but teachers.
What does that mean? Tell me what that means.
So at this point, they have what's known as a guardian program here locally,
Okay.
which is allows school staff or administrators to be armed.
Really?
Yeah, as long as they go take a program through the local sheriff, then they can conceal carry inside schools. The only reason that wasn't done with teachers, which the school board really wanted to do, is
Yeah.
that the local union was smart enough to make sure that was part of the contract, that teachers would not be armed. So we'll see how that plays out in the
See,
future.
I didn't know this, and that's
Yeah.
why I just gave this big sigh. So your principal, who else is school staff? Your
Yeah,
secretary,
it could be
custodian, like,
the custodian, right?
oh
It could
my
be
God,
anybody but teachers, right? So
they could all be packing. They could all and
yep,
concealed, like
right,
they don't have to.
right. Yeah, and one of the things we called out
Wow.
when they did this is that that this puts guns in classrooms, right?
Yes,
And they keep saying, that the school board kept saying, no, it doesn't. This doesn't put guns in classrooms. It's like, well, are you saying administrators and custodians and
are not in the
lunch
classroom.
are not in classrooms, right? Yeah,
It is.
yeah,
Oh
they
my God,
are. Yeah, yeah. So
horrific.
that's yeah that and what's where you can kind of see the change in the tide here is that was actually one of the topics that swept Jennifer Jenkins into office, was that Tina Deskovich wanted to arm teachers.
Right. Right.
Um, and so that was really one of the driving factors that got Jennifer elected. And now they've gone one step closer. They've been creeping, to getting teachers armed. So They're one step closer to
And
that.
that's and
Yeah.
like that's what people don't get this. That's what they do. They
Hmm.
they they will it's like they will ask for the moon, but what they really want is like, this part in the middle. And
Yeah.
so you say, "Well, that's unreasonable. I'm not going to give you the moon, but
Right.
okay, I'll give you like," and they end up with more than they actually wanted. It's
Right.
actually, it's a strategy.
Right.
So they have chipped away at this to the point where, they actually got what they wanted. They got guns in classrooms, which is
Yep.
horrific to me as a parent, because I have seen nothing but children. I mean, it's the number one cause of death of children in this
Right.
country is gun violence. So maybe putting them around more guns is not the answer. But wow,
Right.
wow, that
Yeah.
I just have a visceral reaction to that. It
I,
just
I
so
hear you. I said I've lived here 24 years, right? I've actually lived in Florida almost my whole life.
okay.
And, I remember that, the original compromise for, school safety and dealing with school shootings was SROs, right? Having SROs in schools, which are school resource officers. These are,
Oh, the SR, this
yeah,
school
yeah,
resource.
yeah.
Yeah,
Having
yeah,
a police officer or a sheriff's deputy in schools, and
yes.
armed. And that was the original compromise, that was,
Oh my
and
God.
that was a
And look at what
compromise, and,
happened.
and people have forgotten that was a compromise. It wasn't that everybody was aboard with that. It was that, hey, that sounds like a reasonable compromise,
And how did that
to
work
have those.
out? Like in Uvalde and in,
Right.
where was that other school
Right.
where the school resource officer like
Right.
just hid?
Right.
I mean, this is maybe the answer is to put a few more restrictions on automatic
Right.
weapons
Right.
and start
Right.
punishing those parents. I think every child who has gotten access to an automatic weapon specifically, and used it to hurt someone else, that their parents should be held liable.
Right.
I don't care, because
Right.
it
Now,
just gets me
our
so angry.
response has been, you said SROs would protect
Yes,
schools, right? That didn't happen. You said metal detectors. So the next step is metal detectors. You said that would protect schools. That didn't happen. Now the
right.
next step is you're going to arm staff, and you're
And
going to claim that that's
teachers
going to protect schools. Yeah.
will be next. Yeah,
Yeah.
eventually
Teachers will
they
be
will
next.
get
Yeah.
what they want, and this
Right.
is this is pretty much across the board for what they do. So wow, that's just like I always like whenever I talk to somebody from Brevard, I'm like, give me something to hang my hat on. So we have
Yeah. It's funny you say that, right? I think one of the things that uh, I sent you early on is, how do activists define success, right? And so
yes.
we have a whole different bar here in Brevard County, how we define success, because it's obviously not getting people elected. It's not getting them to change policies. So we have a much, I don't want to say a lower bar. We just have a different way of measuring
Well,
success here in
so
Brevard
and
County.
this is good because I like to close out the show on a positive note. So let's go there. How in the middle of such a shitstorm do you measure success when you've got
Right.
so much against you?
Right. Yeah. So uh, I'm going to back up here a little bit, right, and talk about that Families for Safe Schools and the lessons we
Yeah.
learned from that. Right, is that group didn't work. It became a target for Moms for Liberty, and so what we did is we kind of went underground after
Hmm.
that. The lessons we learned from Families for Safe Schools kind of uh, not succeeding in their actions, and we became a target that was hard to define.
Right.
We use networks. We have a lot of school district employees and teachers that work with us and feed us information. And then instead of attacking Moms for Liberty, we decided, our focus is going to be the school board and school board members and
Yes.
holding them accountable, right?
Yes.
We don't spend time arguing with Moms for Liberty. They're, you know, we hold the school board accountable, right? And
Yes.
so, successes for us is when we can slow them down. That's how
Yes.
we define success here. Is when we can throw a monkey wrench, um,
Right.
a wrench into the works, to a degree, and we've been successful at doing that.
Hmm.
Uh, we've forced them to rewrite their book ban policy like 4 times over 2 years,
Yes.
because we were able to point out the issues with it every time they do it, right? So we've been able to get large groups of people to show up and speak out
Hmm.
against policies and have the press there, right? So
Hmm.
do they do they change those policies, to our satisfaction? They don't, right? But
Right.
because it was a 4-1 board at that point. Now it's a 5-0 board. They're not going to change those policies, right? So
Right.
that's
Right. Right.
not something we think of as a win, right? So um, we have different things that we measure, and I think one of our biggest successes was we were able to make the board look very chaotic, and they were,
Yes.
just by their
Yeah.
nature. And it was so bad they had to hire a consultant to come in and help them with their public perception. So it really was just a different kind of approach that we took to just trying to hold our school board accountable.
And Greg, I entirely agree with you, and this is why, with defensive democracy, actually, you're talking about exactly our strategy as well. Sometimes you can just slow it down, but you can't do nothing, right? Because if
Right.
you do nothing, the wheels are off. And then when your children have children, you have to say to them, I did nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
right.
To me, it's like, I have to be able to tell them that I tried.
Right.
And it is showing up. It is getting out from behind your keyboard. I have no patience anymore. Like you said, with people who are just going to argue back and forth with Moms for Liberty.
Right.
It's a waste of energy. You're not going to change their mind. They're certainly not going to change your mind. So get out from behind them and show up at your school board meetings. Greg, I think that is an awesome message to leave with our listeners today. Show up. Get involved. You're certainly welcome to join Defensive Democracy. You're welcome to start your own, guerrilla group to show up at school board meetings.
Right.
But that is the main thing. And if you have not gone to your school board meeting yet, anybody who's listening to this, I want you to make a mental note to, as soon as you're able to, sit down and look at when the date and time of your next school board meeting is, and just go. You don't have to say anything. Just go and listen.
Take action. That's what we always say. If you want to be involved in this, you got to take action. And
you
just
have to.
Complaining about it on social media is not taking action.
It's not. And you know what? And I agree. It's not fair. We all have better things to do. It sucks. I don't want to be like, I would much rather have a different job, right. but this is where we're at. And so this is where we're going to stay. Gregg, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It was really great speaking to you. And I wish you the best of luck in Brevard County. And if there's ever anything that we can do, Defensive Democracy, to support you guys and what you're doing, just let me know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Karen. It's been a great podcast.